Hey, so something really funny has happened recently. The awfulness that is Generation Alpha is a trending topic right now. Or who knows by the time I get done filming and editing this video. But there are countless of videos on TikTok and YouTube just recounting the horrors that are Gen Alpha. There are a lot of comments being made, such as Gen Alpha doesn't know how to read, they don't know how to write, they're falling behind, they're way below grade level, they don't know how to behave in classrooms, they don't know how to follow instructions, etc, etc, etc. And on top of that, the internet is also blaming millennial parents for not parenting their Gen Alpha kids. There are a lot of conversations going on right now about why that is. Is it because of the pandemic? Is it because of Gen Alpha's overdependence on technology and iPads and iPhones? How could we have let this happen as a society? Well, guys, as a former teacher, I actually kind of saw this coming, to be honest. And I'd like to tell you today my take on how we got here. Now, before I get into how exactly we got here, I think you should know a little bit of background about me. I was in the field of education for 6 years. I've worked in an after-school program, I've worked in a private school, and I have also worked in a charter school. And they all varied in demographics and backgrounds, so I think I can confidently say that I have taught a wide range of students. And like I said before, there are a lot of complaints right now about how Gen Alpha does not know how to behave in classrooms and how they're really behind, but I kind of saw all that even before the pandemic when I was teaching. I experienced the same thing with Gen Z students, or the tail end of Gen Z. Well, the ones that I taught anyway. I think we were already on a steady decline in terms of grades and behavior and being able to focus in class. And I think that the added stress of the pandemic kind of just exacerbated all of our pre-existing problems. When you look at why I quit teaching videos on YouTube, there are a lot of veteran teachers commenting on those videos saying that they have already been witnessing a steady decline of classroom behavior over a span of 10 plus years. But why is that? What caused this if not COVID? Well, let me tell you about my personal experience with teaching and why I left the profession in the first place. I had left my teaching job at the end of 2022, and for a multitude of reasons. Now, shockingly, pay was not one of them. Californian teachers actually get paid pretty decently in comparison to other states. But there were some reasons why I quit that coincide with a lot of other teachers' reasons for leaving. Some of those reasons include students' bad behavior, students' lack of motivation, parents unwilling to work with teachers to correct their students' behavior, and the job overall affecting my mental and physical health. Yeah, let me talk about that last one real quick though. Man, the stress of the job was so much that I regularly had anxiety attacks. There were some days during my teaching profession where I would just be crying, like during one of my off periods, and I would think that I could get it together within that off period, but I just couldn't, and I'd have to get a sub to cover for me for the day because it was just that bad. Because I get so anxious about how the kids were gonna tear into me that day. Like legit, you have to be really emotionally strong to handle teaching, and there are just, everyone has good days and bad days. Just like any other person, I have my own life and I have other things going on. There were some days where I would already be in a terrible headspace, and children verbally attacking you does not help. My partner, who'd watch me come home every day from work, told me that I looked like I was going to unalive myself at any moment. He saw it on my face every time I came home. It was horrible. And not to mention too, I was so stressed that I was stress eating, I was stress drinking. I think when I was teaching, I gained about 20 to 30 pounds. And after being a year away from the profession, I've lost some of that weight, but not all of it. But yeah, overall, the job was just not physically nor emotionally healthy for me. And see, that was just one half of it. The other half of it came from the colleagues I worked with. Listen, I believe that most everyone who enters the field of teaching has great intentions and comes into it wanting to help children. That's great. However, I had to deal with quite a number of colleagues who, in my opinion, contributed to that student misbehavior. And I have several examples. I had this one colleague who in their class, all they would do was play movies, like day in, day out. They would just play movies for the kids. And they swore that it was like, a movie that pertained to whatever lesson they were teaching, because I think they were teaching some sort of like life skills class, something like that. But yeah, they would play movies day in, day out. The kids loved that teacher, obviously, because they knew that they wouldn't really have to do anything that day for when they had that teacher's class. And admin knew about what the teacher was doing as well, but they didn't really do anything. They were just like, oh yeah, we hear that the kids love you. Great job. Great job. They're playing movies for the kids every day. How's that contributing to their education? Is there really much you can learn from Fast and Furious besides family? Family. Then there was this other coworker of mine who tried to motivate kids by promising like a fun non-school related activity for them if they did their work, which okay, sure, that could be a thing, that could be a motivator, especially with kids who like are already not very motivated by school. But here's the thing though, that teacher would always give in to the kids and do the fun activity first. Like the kids would beg them and be like, we promise that we're gonna do our work afterwards, but let's do the fun activity first, please. And the teacher would always fall for it, and they do the fun activity, and lo and behold, the kids do not complete their work afterwards. You lost your leverage, my man. Yeah, of course they're not gonna. Are we forgetting that kids are kids? Are we surprised? And that's another common thing I noticed amongst my coworkers at the time. They seem to have forgotten how kids work. Like, of course a student is going to try to not do school if you let them. Of course they're going to try to be your friend if that means that you give them like the easy way out, man. And listen, I'm not saying that you can't be chill with your students. I think it's totally fine to grant exceptions and extensions here or there if a student has a good excuse. But I think that there is a huge difference between treating your students like people and being respectful of them, and then just straight up having a savior complex. Because oh my god, did so many of my colleagues have some sort of f***ing savior complex. There were so many who thought that they were like the child whisperer and only they truly understood the kids, when in reality all that was really happening was that they were like crossing some boundaries and kind of being creepily too close to the kids. But don't get me wrong, not in a creepy, gross, disgusting sexual way, but more so in a that's not quite that professional way. More in a like, you shouldn't have your kid's phone number way, more in like a you shouldn't add your kids on your Switch way. I don't care if you are texting them about homework reminders. I just don't think you should be texting them. And same thing with social media. I know some teachers have like teacher social medias and stuff, but I personally am not a fan of that either. I think kids should have their own space. If social media is their space, let them have their space, dude. I don't care if you get better results, sending your kid an Instagram message about their homework. That is also a little invasive and weird, and I think it could just lead to more harm than good, to be honest. Again, it's nice to know your students and treat them like human beings, but again, let's not treat them like our actual friends, because at the end of the day, there should be a professional boundary between teachers and students. When I was a teacher and I wasn't having to deal with misbehavior all the time, I did like my job. I love teaching. There is nothing cooler than teaching science and watching kids' faces light up when they have like a super cool experiment and like watching them grow. I think all that is awesome. But when my colleagues lowered their expectations for our students, the students also wanted me to have those lowered expectations. And I was met with a lot of backlash just because I wanted to do my job and teach, because they were enabling their bad behavior, which leads me to my next section. So hopefully in that first section, you see why I wanted to leave teaching, and also hopefully that paints a picture on how things are already kind of getting out of hand. But in this section, I want to dive a bit deeper into how I think kids got to where they are today and how we were the ones who made them this way. You see, the education system knows it's broken, and there have been many conversations, many initiatives and protocols to try to remedy that. Teachers and admin know that the curriculum that is given to us is outdated and icky. And while we can't really change our government issued curriculum, what we can do is try to make it more relatable to the kids, right? We can try to make it more engaging and try to make the lesson much more than just your standard taking notes from an overhead projector. We can recognize the horrible treatment that children of the past faced in school institutions and try to make it a much more welcoming and comfortable place for students of the present. However, I think along the way of that conversation, a lot of adults interpreted the notion of treat students equitably and respectably as spoil the kids rotten and don't ever tell them no.
No. Stop doing like that. Yeah. Stop doing like that. Yeah.
Negative. You must apologize immediately.
He's not respecting my store. He need to apologize to me.
Are you serious?
Because just as much as millennial parents are accused of not parenting their kids, there are some modern day school systems in place that do similar damage to our students, in my opinion. One example that comes to mind is restorative justice in education. For those of you unfamiliar with this concept, this is an initiative that schools are trying to adopt to make schools a warmer place for the student, as well as address the misbehavioral issues without resorting to stricter disciplinary measures. There's some simple stuff that you can do that comes with restorative justice, such as greeting your kids at the door, learning more about them, getting to know them as human beings. All that I agree with. That's great. And then there's the behavior management part of restorative justice. So the idea is that when a student misbehaves, you talk it out with the student. You learn more about why they did the misdeed, and you get a little more of their backstory, a little more why they did it in the first place. And usually a school counselor or the principal or the vice principal will be a part of that conversation to help mediate and to also learn more about the student backstory. After hearing the student out, there's supposed to be a conversation that happens about why their particular misdeed may be considered bad. There's also supposed to be student peers involved, and the student who committed the initial misbehavior is supposed to do an action step as well afterwards. For example, if they trash the cafeteria, well, obviously they have to clean up their mess, and also maybe help clean up in the future. And then there's also supposed to be a conversation that happens with the parent to figure out if there's something at home causing this misbehavior. And also the parent is supposed to help out and cooperate and make sure that the student does not commit these misbehaviors in the future. Now, on paper, this sounds great. I don't think I've said anything that is disagreeable so far. And I think that on paper, this is a way better disciplinary measure than, let's say, detention, where students kind of do nothing in there anyway, or writing "I will not trash the cafeteria" 100 times, like real old school. I think it is so much more helpful to talk things out with a student and help them realize why what they did is wrong and get to the root of it and figure out why this student might be, misbehaving in the first place, because maybe there's a bigger issue that we don't know about. And we as educators would probably want to help with that. But in practice, does that actually happen? Well, that certainly did not happen for the schools I worked at. And it doesn't seem to be happening for a majority of schools who try to implement restorative justice, based on the Reddit forums I saw anyway. In my experience, schools do a really great job of focusing on the first two parts, making sure that school is a warmer place for students and having that initial conversation with the student about their misbehavior. They are good at those two parts. However, they are so bad at making sure that the stuff that's supposed to happen afterwards actually happens. There are so many stories of, admin failing to follow up with students afterwards to make sure that they completed their appropriate action steps to make sure that things are better. I don't think I ever saw student peers involved helping their buddy stay out of trouble. If there were parent conversations, though that happened only sometimes, they were often unsuccessful because parents would often get immediately defensive about their kids. They did not want to hear about how their child was misbehaving. And then, of course, you have the classic case of a student gets sent to a principal's office to talk about this. And granted, we are trying to make the experience less scary. We are trying to learn more about the child and get to the root of the problem, really figure out why they are behaving the way that they're behaving. But you get the common story of how students will go into the principal's office, receive a snack or a treat, and then be sent on their merry way. Kind of like in Abbott Elementary.
Ava literally made me take candy from a baby, and she didn't do anything to discipline Micah at all.
Well, Ava doesn't discipline the kids.
So then why did you tell me to send them to her?
Remember when I said you couldn't do that?
Look, sending a kid to Ava just helps get him out of the room so that you can regain control of the rest of the class.
But it doesn't fix the problem. And rewarding bad behavior is the opposite of what a principal should do, right?
Oh, wait. Repeat what you just said, because for a second it sounded like you expect Ava to do her job. What y'all doing in here?
Kids are being rewarded for their bad behavior. And if they're not being rewarded, they are at least not really given any consequences. Like, yes, we talk about it, but then they go off and do the same thing next week. Like many other teachers on the Reddit forum I mentioned earlier, I feel as though restorative justice is something that admin can post on their school website and say that they did, you know, just to prove that their school is doing a modern day social justice approved protocol, but without actually putting in the work or getting the resources to make sure that it is implemented properly. I should add though that sometimes it's not entirely admin's fault. I mean, they do have higher ups themselves, they do have a budget they have to work within, but I digress. For the teachers who did say that they were successful in implementing restorative justice, I noticed that they also mentioned that they had a team of social workers working hard alongside them. But obviously this is a rare case. Obviously most schools do not have a budget to have a team of social workers to make sure that such a protocol is implemented properly. And some people might ask, okay, well, why aren't the teachers doing the follow-up then? Well, I mean, because we're already so swamped. Sorry. We kind of really just wanted to teach. Lesson planning already takes up so much time. Even just reaching out initially and recording the student misbehavior and setting up the appointments for, you know, the restorative justice talks is already a lot out of your schedule. I think a separate social worker team is needed in order to implement it properly, especially with, you know, the amount of students that teachers have and the amount of misbehaving that is done. It's just impossible for teachers to handle alone. But on top of all that, yes, there's more. I'm sorry. If you are tired of me talking about this by now, well, geez, that's why I quit teaching. I was also tired of talking about this. But on top of all that, there are also educational practices that enable students avoidance of focusing in the classroom, like assigning students Chromebooks. Listen, in this day and age, I understand how important it is to make sure that students know how to use technology. I mean, technology and laptops and all that is used in like literally almost all workplaces nowadays. However, in both of the schools I worked at, man, the Chromebooks were just so much more distraction than anything else. Kids would play games on that thing. Kids would listen to music. They'd bring their own big ass headphones and just straight up ignore the teacher and just listen to music off of their Chromebook. If they didn't already have a smart device themselves to distract themselves with, well, we just handed them one. And like many other teachers have already said, we are passing students when they're not even grade level. And even when teachers who do fail students because they're underperforming, even when they do fail them, the admin passes them along anyway because it looks better for their school. But we are not solving the issue. We are just trying to cover it. We are covering it with a blanket and the blanket's getting full. The problem is seeping out. I had kids come into my chemistry class not knowing how to multiply in 11th grade. What am I supposed to do with that? How am I supposed to teach chemistry if the children do not know how to do basic elementary multiplication? And then there's the cesspool of shit that kids see on social media, which okay, now I legitimately don't know who to blame for this, but aside from the obvious crap of like, you know, kids seeing prank videos and other mindless garbage and, you know, having a parasocial relationship with that, I have also seen kids take concepts that are meant to be, you know, helpful and useful and take it way out of context and use it incorrectly. An example that comes to mind immediately is this one time where a student had to present their project. And this particular student was very nervous about it. I mean, understandable. That was like all of our least favorite part about school was presenting. Are you kidding me? I dreaded that shit. It was awful. But I think it is a skill that we all need to learn though. But anywho, this student was not thrilled about presenting their project. So when it came time for them to present, they ran out of the classroom and said, "I do not consent." Okay, I'm glad you know that word, sweetie. I'm glad you know of it. But we're not really, that's not the context. That's not the context in which we use that one. I'm sorry. And there are so many other instances of them taking concepts and warping them into something completely different. But I'm already on page 5 of this script and I already promised myself that this would be a shorter video and I don't think I'm accomplishing that. So I'm going to move on to the next section. Now, in all of the videos I've seen criticizing Gen Alpha so far, a lot of them are asking, is that generation doomed? Are we doomed? Is this the future of adults? They're doomed. They'll never learn. We're doomed. Society's doomed. Our society is gonna go down the skibbity toilet. And yes, while I do agree that it looks pretty bleak, I'm not gonna sugarcoat that. That doesn't mean all hope is lost. I mean, shit. I used to be a menace when I was a kid. I didn't understand social justice at all. I thought it was so cool to be edgy and everything. I didn't understand social norms or cues or anything like that. I mean, I'm still learning that part, but I did learn a lot when I got my first part-time job. I learned a lot when I went to college and learned a lot more about sociology and different ways of life and living and perspectives. I learned a lot when I received constructive criticism and also not so constructive criticism from friends and people who were close to me. And I think the same will happen for Gen Alpha. Maybe. Hopefully. Because while they are menaces now, societal systems have kind of remained unchanged for like decades. The behavior that they're exhibiting now doesn't really fly when it comes to, careers that pay you a livable wage. And not knowing how to study or things like that is also not going to fly when you get to college. And if they don't learn to adapt to either of those situations, well, I mean, eventually their millennial parents are going to get tired of wiping their ass. So there is also that. They'll figure it out because they'll have to. And I think at the same time, we got to remember as participants of society that it is also up to us to keep other participants of society in line. And no, I don't mean by hitting the kids. Stop trying to hit the kids, but by a normal and healthy amount of shame and educating others on what acceptable social behavior is. Because in America's plight for hyper-individualism and insisting that, the problems in the world have nothing to do with us, we have to remember that each of us has the power to influence in one way or another. Whether it's a big influence or a small influence, you still have influence. And yes, there are huge systematic failures that we have no control over. That is correct. And no, I don't have specific action steps that we as adults outside of the education system can take to improve the situation that is Gen Alpha. But all I am saying is don't lose sight over the control that you do have. Be assertive. If kids come to your dental office and mess up your pamphlets, tell them and the parent that it is unacceptable and that you expect them to clean up after themselves. Sometimes people need a firm reminder. After leaving teaching, I started working in a corporate office, and I cannot tell you how many adult children I work with. Honestly, my workplace has a field day with me because of how honestly I speak sometimes. But I can attest that sometimes it just takes some firmness in your voice and firmness in your chest to let people know that you mean it, that what they're doing is unacceptable, to snap them out of their main character syndrome and bring them back to the reality that they share a space with others. So yes, they're bad for now, but let's not give up hope on them, because that is what got them here in the first place. So that about does it for my SparkNotes version of my thoughts on Gen Alpha. Are you or were you a teacher? What are your thoughts on the current education system? Or are you a student or did you recently graduate? What was school like for you? What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below. And if you made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. Consider giving it a like, consider subscribing if you'd like to see more random videos from me. And I think I'm gonna go lie down now, so thank you. Okay, that's enough for me. Bye-bye.